Let us discuss briefly the role stomata play in the process of transpiration and the transport of water and minerals in a bulk fashion through the xylem. Stomatal control is going to be necessary to ensure that, number one, when the plant needs CO2, the stomata are open so that photosynthesis can happen, but also under emergency situations, the plant will want to regulate the stomata, closing them if water is becoming limited in the soil and turgor pressure of plant cells begins to decline. It is known, for example, that up to 95% of the water a plant loses is going to be as a result of transpiration happening through the stomata. You may imagine that there may be some evaporation by other surfaces of the plant, including the extended surface area of a leaf. Leaves have a large surface area because they are flat, but they're also going to be broad. And yet it is not through the surface of the leaf that plants are losing water, because there's going to be usually a waxy cuticle to protecting most of surfaces, including leaves and stems and trunk. Therefore, even though stomata only make up a very tiny fraction of the epidermis of a leaf, most of the evaporation will be taking place through there. Let's consider what forms these openings we call stomata. Stomata openings are going to be regulated by the action of guard cells. Typically, there's going to be two guard cells positioned right there next to one another. If you pay attention to this illustration and my laser pointer, I can follow the outline of one of these guard cells. It is going to be like half of one of those lifesaver candies, if you know what I mean. There I go again. Talking about candy, my addiction to sweets. And I'm going to follow the outline of the other guard cell over here. And so these two guard cells are going to be changing shape, and as the shape changes, the stomata may open or it may close. And this is going to be largely controlled by internal factors of the plant, but also external environmental factors. Let's consider what are the mechanisms that can make stomata change their shape. When guard cells become turgid, they are going to be bowing outward. And so I'm going to use a little bit of a simulation over here. Pretend, for example, that my fists, just my fists, are the guard cells. If they become turgid, then what they do is they bow to the outside part of the leaf, and when they become flaccid, then they come together again, closing the stomata. So once again, guard cells becoming turgid, they bow out, stomata open. When they become flaccid, they return back to the original position, and stomata will be closing. So now the next question you may ask, what exactly is causing the stomata to change their shape and to become turgid? And the answer is going to be in part explained by the concentrations of potassium ions that can be moved into these guard cells. The red dots you see in this illustration are going to be the potassium ions. So there are going to be special ion channels that are going to be allowing for these ions to go from regions of low concentration to high concentration. That immediately should tell you we're talking about active transport. And so as these potassium ions move into the guard cells by active transport, water will follow. And that is going to make these cells increase their turgor pressure. Then they bow out and the stomata opens. Now for the stomata to close, the red little dots we have here, which are representing potassium ions, those are going to be moving back out of the guard cells. And as the potassium ions move out, so does water, making these guard cells flaccid again. And so now we know that the shape of stomata, whether they become turgid and bow out, opening the stomata, or they become flaccid and they close again, is largely connected to the active transport of potassium ions moving in or out, and the water follows. Let's take a look at what are some of those environmental factors that can activate the guard cells' uptake of potassium ions so that the stomata can open. Stomata are usually going to be open during the daytime, and scientists have been able to discover certain protein light receptors that exist in the membrane of these guard cells. And so when the light is shining, there's going to be those special receptors on the plasma membrane that will stimulate, will activate the ion channels for the movement of potassium into the guard cells so they can become turgid and the stomata to open. So light makes the stomata open. But also plants will open the stomata if internally CO2 levels are going down. If the air spaces surrounding the spongy mesophyll is becoming low, then plants will want to open the stomata. Why CO2? Well, remember the basic ingredient for photosynthesis. Plants need water and they need CO2 in order to make the sugar they so much need as a source of energy for their own metabolic activities. Plants also have an internal clock that will make them close the stomata. Guard cells will become flaccid at nighttime because if you think about it, at nighttime there's no light, there's no need for CO2 because photosynthesis is not going to be happening. And so again, this is something that has been discovered in plants. They also happen to have a circadian rhythm, like animals that have predictable patterns of behavior. Many animals we call diurnal, they're active during the day and they sleep at night. Animals that are nocturnal, they're active during the night and they sleep during the day. So plants are going to have circadian rhythms where most of their metabolic activity is going to be happening during the day when the sun is shining and they can do photosynthesis. Additionally, scientists have studied plants under conditions of drought, high temperatures, and also high wind. And what happens when you have high wind in combination with high temperatures is that the amount of transpiration, the amount of water lost through the stomata is going to increase. And this excessive loss of water will be a problem to the plant if down in the soil there's not enough water to be moving it up through the xylem and replenishing the water that is being lost. And so what plants can do in conditions of drought or high wind is that they can produce a substance called abscisic acid. This abscisic acid acts like a hormone, a messenger molecule that is going to inhibit the guard cells' uptake of potassium. And if the plant cells cannot take if the guard cells cannot take potassium, then they cannot become turgid and the stomata will not open. The problem with closing the stomata is this. If the stomata closes, the plant is saving water, for sure, but also the plant will not be able to take up CO2. And that will prevent them from doing photosynthesis. And without photosynthesis, the plant will have no sugar to be able to perform its own metabolic activities. So it's a trade-off that works as a temporary measure, but extended periods of drought, heat, or windy conditions may stress a plant and dehydrate it to the point that they may not be able to recover. So what strategies do plants have to deal with hot environments, places where just year-round temperatures are going to be hotter, places in the world where precipitation is going to be very small, sometimes almost like none on certain given years. What plants do in these kinds of environments, where they may live year-round, is that they are going to perform most of their activities during the time when it rains. Take a look, for example, at this plant you can find in the California desert. Part of the California desert includes the Sonora desert, and that's where you find these ocotillo plants. During heavy rain, you will see that these plants almost overnight will turn green. While there's still some moisture in the soil, they will take advantage of that to produce leaves, and then these leaves will do photosynthesis so much that they can save some resources. And when the soil dries again, which is going to be the norm for most of the year in these parts of the desert, ocotillo plants are going to look like this, completely barren, no leaves. They do not look green at all. Other plants in the desert or dry environments are going to have modified leaves. When you think, for example, about a cactus, the leaves of a cactus are going to be precisely those needles of the cactus, the spines of the cactus. Here you see a type of cactus where the leaves are modified in the form of like very thin, slender hairs. Those are the leaves. As you can predict, there's not going to be very much stomata openings for these plants here on the leaves. In fact, there'll be none. Some of the stomata may be present on the stem of the plant, the green portion you see in between the cactus needles or cactus spines. That is where photosynthesis will be happening. Additionally, for plants we call succulents, and by the way, succulents include the cacti, is that they engage in a specific type of metabolic pathway that leads to photosynthesis, and it's called the crassulacean acid metabolism. One of the characteristics of this type of metabolism is that it fixes carbon dioxide during the nighttime into a specific 4-carbon compound known as oxaloacetate. And what plants will do in this case, like cacti, they will open the stomata at nighttime when it's cooler. That way, if transpiration through the stomata will be less, but at the same time, they only have a limited amount of CO2 they can fix at nighttime, and consequently, their growth is going to be slow. Have you ever kept a cactus at home? If the answer is yes, did you see it grow? How much did it grow? Most cacti, it will seem to their owners that they are never growing, but they do grow. It's just going to be a very small growth, and that's because of the restrictions they have with regards to metabolism, since they only fix carbon dioxide at nighttime. So as you can see, guard cells and the stomata openings that they regulate are going to be important factors in the cohesion tension hypothesis of how water is pulled up into the plant rather than pushed up into the leaves.